we create scenarios of what's going to happen if I let this person go. And very rarely does that come true. As I often tell clients, the people you fire never give you as much trouble as the people you don't. It just doesn't happen that way. We have our idea of where people are aligned. Well, if I fire this person's really going to be upset because they've been working together for that fear. It's real. And that's why when this tends to always work, sit down with an executive and ask them 2 questions. Say, look, if knowing what you know now about that person, would you hire them again? Number 1. And secondly, if the person walked in this afternoon and said, you know what, I had another offer. Unfortunately, I'm going to take it. I'm giving you my 2 weeks. How would you feel? And how many times I had an executive say to that first question, no, I would not hire that person again, knowing what I do now. And if they came in and said that, it would make my week.
Welcome to Vibecast, the podcast that dives deep into the heartbeat of workplace culture. I'm your host, Kristi Skutevik. Join me in conversations with extraordinary leaders as we unravel their experiences, both positive and negative, that have impacted workplace culture. This podcast is more than storytelling. It's about actionable insights. Are you ready to transform the vibe at your workplace? Let's go. Today's guest is someone who really gets people. Floyd Consulting grows people, and Tony Ferraro has spent his entire career doing exactly that. He has more than 25 years of leadership experience across education, business, and executive coaching. Tony has seen what works, what doesn't, and what actually moves humans and organizations forward. From physics teacher to college baseball coach, from tech founder to executive director of a growing private academy, Tony's path hasn't been linear, but it's been deeply intentional. Today, he coaches CEOs across the country, helps leaders build cultures that last, and brings real-world wisdom shaped by both wins and mistakes. He's also a husband, a dad of 7, a triathlete, and proof that leadership is lived, not just taught. This is a grounded conversation about people, growth, and leading well. All right, Tony, well, thank you for joining me today. You came to me as a recommendation from Kate, who runs Floyd Consulting, right? And I was introduced to her through somebody else and really kind of already knew about Floyd through this whole Dream Manager certification. I haven't done the certification, but I've read the book because that was recommended to me. So it feels like a lot of different places is how I got to you. And I'm really excited to have this conversation today. So thanks for being here. I appreciate it. And I appreciate, the wisdom that you're going to bring today.
Well, you're optimistic, but I do appreciate I appreciate the invite. I'm really looking forward to our conversation also.
Awesome. Well, as I do, I just like to start out, with helping listeners understand how you define what a vibe is and what it means in the workplace.
Yeah. So I've been thinking about this, and we do a lot of work with companies and their culture. And I think there's a really direct connection between what we define as a vibe and culture. I mean, I think they're very similar. And so in coming across that, thinking about that rather, there are some things that we look at, what is a great culture. And so with that, a few things came to mind. So the first one is, I think the vibe of an organization is, I think in direct correlation, you kind of feel it when there's a lot of A players around. You just know that the people around are really, really A players, top-notch folks. That I think starts to create a vibe, but you sense it. So you see a lot of A players around. That I think is part of the vibe. The other thing, and I've been trying to think this through. It's a new thought that I've had, but the idea of this concept of an energy drain. So the reality is we spend a lot of time, effort, and energy on things, not only in our organizations, but our lives too, probably, that just take away they drain energy. And the best example is, in your house, if you have a basement in your house, for example, and by the furnace.
I live in California.
I knew that as soon as I said that. I was actually speaking out in California not too long ago, and I brought up the idea of a basement, and people looked at me like I had 3 heads. So ductwork in a house from your furnace, right, or your air conditioner, I guess in your case, if there's a hole close to the furnace in that duct, the upstairs doesn't get heated because the energy just goes out. And so I've been thinking about that analogy. There are so many things that go on in organizations that detract from its accomplishing its mission. And those are energy drains. And when there's a good vibe, there just aren't many of those. There's not time, effort, and energy spent on drama and other things that really don't help the organization fulfill its mission, which is what we really say culture is. It are those things that help the company accomplish its mission and either increase or decrease people's desire to love to come to work.
Yeah.
So
I like that
yeah.
visual of like the ductwork and like if there's these holes in it, right? It's just like sucking the air out of the room or not serving its purpose of pumping hot air into a room, right? So, I love that.
And it's
Yeah.
interesting not to go on and on about this analogy, but once you start thinking about something, you notice things. So as soon as I started thinking about this, I noticed there's a company here in Ohio, and I think they're national. They go in and they inject this chemical into your ducts, and it goes and it attaches itself to the inside walls of the duct and creates this barrier. And what's really fascinating is at the end of your ductwork, so say it's like upstairs, the furthest they put a meter and they start it and it shows like the inefficiency of how much is getting there. And as they start injecting this stuff in, it starts sealing the duct and you see this efficiency meter just go up and something. That's exactly what happens when you start eliminating those cracks and those energy drains. So I think that's part of the vibe. It's just everything is pointed towards the mission. You got great people working to, towards the same goal. There's not much drama, and that just creates a good vibe about the place. People enjoy being there. And but I'm just amazed at how much time we spend on things that just drain time, effort, and energy. And I get it. As an executive coach, I always have to remind myself, like, I've been in the shoes of the people I'm coaching. So on the surface, sometimes that sounds like, well, why in the world is this even going on? I get it. There's people involved. And so it's just they're unique situations, but at the same time, that's really the value of a coach that we're talking about, is to point out those things that we might be blind to, those blind spots that we have.
Yeah.
So if that makes
And I
sense.
think sometimes we're so blinded to the simplicity of things, right? Because we've over-engineered how we do work sometimes, or we've been there so long, it takes like an outside perspective to tap you on the shoulder and say like, "Hey, have you considered just like rolling it back to the basics and like trying something that you did maybe 10 years ago because you've forgotten to do that for so long and it's so simple, but you've like either overcomplicated it for many reasons, right? This isn't like because you're trying to. Sometimes it's just a matter of like being reminded that it doesn't have to be that complicated. That's interesting, that concept, that visual again with the ductwork is like they put this barrier in. So you think of like all of the activities that you do in an organization or as a leader as like this barrier, right? It's either like gonna dissolve the ductwork or it's going to provide this protective layer going down to this meter, which many organizations, a meter is an engagement survey or some sort of like numerical data that helps organizations see whether or not they're doing better or worse. And so that's just, when you said that, that's like the visual that I thought of like, okay, if there's this protective barrier, sometimes it's protective, sometimes it's not. And it all leads to this end result of like better or worse within an organization. So,
Right. Yep.
yeah.
No, and we definitely overcomplicate it. It's one of the founder of our company, author Matthew Kelly, is just his real genius is in taking what we make complex situations and just getting them down to the simplest, the simplest points, the simplest ideas of things. And that's often what happens when we're dealing, like I'm dealing with executive coaches. Oftentimes it's just asking a question and being quiet and because folks, everyone has the answer. I mean, they do. People don't need answers. They need the right questions. And so culture is one of those. When you say, well, why are you doing this? And sometimes it is simple as saying, just stop doing that. Right? This is going on. Why are you doing that? What's
Yeah.
this?
And then they stop and think, and they're like,
I don't know.
I don't really know
I don't
why.
really know, but we are. Right. So
For
yeah.
sure, for sure. I once sat in a room of executives around a table and we were talking about culture and vibes and leadership and all these things and just giving some like very simple suggestions. And this one gentleman raised his hand and he's like, I just have to be honest. And I'm like, what's up? And he's like, I'm embarrassed. I'm like, and I've told this story several times before. And I'm like, embarrassed? He's like, this stuff is so simple. I'm embarrassed I didn't come up with it myself. And I was like, you know, sometimes that's how it rolls. You just need somebody to kind of like, again, tap you on the shoulder or look you in the eye and say, like, stop, stop. You are making this way more complicated than it
Yeah.
needs to be.
Because no one comes to work and say, I'm really going to detract from our culture today.
No,
And I am intentionally going to do these things that are going to counteract everything we do. That's my goal today. It's on my list. Let's see how that goes. No one does that. Everyone comes, I think, unless, most leaders come to work with, the idea of really making things special that day. And then sometimes it just goes off the rails.
for sure. Okay. So I love stories and I want to hear kind of your journey and in in getting you to where you are today, right? As it relates to like how what you've done in your past that's gotten you to a place where you're like, it's important for me to pour into other people to make sure that they can be the best leaders they can be, the best founders that they can be, create the right cultures within their organization. Like we all have something that's been a defining moment for us that has gotten us to where we are today. So talk us through that story and that journey of who you are and how you became what you are today.
Yeah. So I'm often asked, like, folks will say, how do you become an executive coach or what's the, and the answer to me is really simple. And especially when it's a younger person, I'll say, what you want to do is take the next somewhere between 20 and 25 years and make as many mistakes as you possibly can. Right. And then you'll start to be qualified, for the job. And that's really why I am where I am, or if any good comes out of what I do, it's simply because I've been there and have made those mistakes, have stepped on those landmines, and really don't want to see people. You don't have to go through those things. So, so that being said, just a real quick back. So my original professional life was in education. I was a physics major in college and taught, which is a separate story. I had some horrible advice. Somebody, one of my friends said, I was trying to think about a major and those things. And I kind of knew I wanted to teach. He said, well, look, when you go to college, don't study something get your money's worth and study something you don't know a whole lot about. I'm like, I'll be, yeah, really bad advice. Okay.
Lesson number 1 in being a coach, right? Is like, don't listen to that guy.
Yes. So I spent 4 years, becoming the curve maker in physics classes. The rest of the class loved me. All right. But it was tough. It was a huge challenge. I mean, I didn't have the mathematical background. It was just, and I can remember, I tell my kids this often. I can remember the exact day in December walking across campus after getting out of I think it was a nuclear physics class, whatever it is, and saying, I'm the dumbest person on this campus, and really feeling that way. It was a real challenge. And so, but when I went into teaching and I knew I wanted to teach, so I started teaching physics, and it actually prepared me because I really felt like I related to those kids who were CB students. I really understood where they were coming from.
Realize in college that this probably wasn't the right path for you. You went on to teach it.
Yes, exactly right.
Wow. All right. That's called grit and determination. But
Yeah.
all right.
So I taught. I was a coach for a while, and just it's so thoroughly enjoyed teaching. It was just a wonderful, wonderful situation. From there, I went on. I coached a couple years in college. I was a football and baseball coach, and did that, and then taught a little bit. But then started a company. We did informational technology for schools. It's just kind of the start of where all school records were being, computerized and shows you how old I am. Libraries were
Quite a journey of
libraries were kind of coming online. Built that for about 5 years. Worked in that company. We eventually sold it. It was becoming pretty much in demand, mostly from a training standpoint. And I still remember, talk about impactful days. I'm sitting in the Pittsburgh airport and thinking, I really want to be home right now. And I kept going into school. We worked primarily with schools and school districts. And every time I would leave a school thinking, I wish I was back there. So we sold the company, went back, got a leadership position in a school that had a couple of those. And then was hired to be the executive director, president of a private academy, and took that on, small little thing. And over the next decade and plus, we grew at almost a tripling of enrollment. We moved to a multi-million-dollar campus. We bought a public school. It was a private school. We bought a public school that was building. And so we moved in. We went from 20,000 square feet to about 121,000 square feet, and moved in, started the first private high school in the area in like 60 years. And so all the things we set out to do, it was just a great adventure. And
what do you attribute, like, if you could look back on that now, and I'm sure you have quite a few times, is there any kind of like common thread that ran through that created that success? Because I'm sure you hit trials along the way.
Well, yeah, I mean, in private schools, finances are always an issue. Well, let me put it a different way. We used to say money's never the problem. The lack of money, that's a problem, right? So several times of, we're not going to make payroll and all those kinds of things. But I think, and this isn't necessarily a really great quality, I don't think. In some ways it serves me well, but I do have a tendency to dive into something and not think about, that this can fail or now and just dive in. I don't, sometimes to a detriment of like not having perspective, but it's like, I'm just all in. And in that case, so my wife and I, we've been blessed. We have 7 children. And at that time in the school, so it's a school at that time, 4 or 5 of the cool were in the school. So, and my wife taught at the school. So we were all in this fight. We were all in, which is great. It allowed for, it's kind of burned the ships, at that point we're all in on this. And, there's a detriment to that because despite, all of the growth, what sort of evolved is as much growth as we had as a school. I saw it as still in kind of a startup phase and, just always, what's the next thing? What's the next thing? What's the next thing? Well, over time in any organization, there becomes or can at least this desire for calm. And, we had a board, and for the length of the board is a self-appointed board. We always worked in great concert together. And, around the 11th year, we brought some new people on the board. And, I remember after the first board meeting calling a friend of mine I really trust, and I'm like, something doesn't seem right here. And he gave me a really interesting piece of advice. He said, well, he said, do you have to leave? I said, no, I don't think so, but I need to keep an eye on this. He said, okay, well, call me as the year goes on. And we had a wonderful school year. We raised more. It was a big part of my job, raising money. We raised more money than we had ever raised in any one year. Having a great year. We finished our biggest fundraising night on a Saturday, had a board meeting. This was in April, had a board meeting the following Tuesday, or at least what I thought was a board meeting. So, and let me just say, as the year went on, this chasm kind of got bigger in terms of some folks wanting to calm things down, stay where we are. Let's not get too big. And my desire to, plow ahead. And, so anyway, thought this was a board meeting, walked in, it was the board president and the board attorney. I'm like, okay, well, this isn't going to be a regular board meeting. So we spent the next 45 minutes really hashing out our conflicting visions of the school. And at the end of that, it kind of became apparent, we just can't walk this journey together anymore. And I was amazed at what this huge burden just came off my shoulders. I hadn't realized really how much I was carrying. Now, so I knew it was time to leave. What I didn't expect was for them to say, and let's make this official today. So now when you're in private education, when you leave for a 10 o'clock meeting and don't come back, People want to know who'd you hurt or what'd you take. I mean, my professional reputation got cut in half. My kids were at the school. My wife was teaching. I'm like, just get the kids. And that was it. That was it. So I remember that night calling that same friend back and going, things are not great. And he asked the same question. Well, do you have to leave? I said, well, I don't have a key anymore. So I'm pretty sure I gotta leave. All right. But he gave me this great piece of advice. And he said, well, what you really need to do now is start dreaming. He says, you need to think about what your dream job is, what you're good at, what you're not good at. You need to start dreaming. And I said, look, Alan, I got 7 kids. That's probably the last thing, brother, I need to be doing is just dreaming. And he said, no, you start dreaming. And he hung up. That was it. And he was really right. So we negotiated. I had about 6 months where I didn't have to do anything, thankfully. And so I began to think about those questions he asked. I brought each of my kids in separately. I'm like, how did having me around school and being together, and most of it was positive, but there were some negatives that I wasn't even aware of. So I started to think about what it is I did well, what things I didn't do well, what I liked to do, what I didn't like to do. And then right about that time was when my path crossed with Matthew. And he said, maybe why don't you come aboard and start out as a dream manager? So I came in, was a dream manager, had one client, about 75 people. I was coaching 75 people, and which was great. Did that for a bit. That started to go well. So let's get you to some other coaching. I started doing some executive coaching, started doing some speaking, and things have just grown from there. Right now, I'm the director of coaching. I've been, with him for quite a while. That's, several projects, and it's interesting. I remember speaking one night. I got sent out on a speaking engagement, and it was out in Orange County. And so, but we get done with the event that night, and I get back to my room about 1:00, in the morning. And I just sat for a minute. I'm like, wow, I am doing everything I want to do. I'm not doing things I don't want to do. I'm doing things I think I'm good at. I'm certainly not doing the things that I know I'm not professionally good at. I think I have my dream job. And so I was so excited, called my wife. If you're paying attention, we live in Cincinnati. I was in California. It was 1 a.m. So, yes. So 4:00, I said, hey, honey, I just want to tell you, I'm just so excited about things right now, and nothing on the other end. I'm like, I just, I think I have my dream job. I mean, I'm doing the things I want to do. I'm not doing the things I don't want to do. I'm just, wow, this is so great. Still nothing. I said, look, did you, in your wildest dreams, did you ever see me doing this? Well, by that time, she was a little frustrated. She finally said, look, you're not in my wildest dreams. I don't know if that was the end of that conversation. But the point was, so I've been for my time now, the past, 10 years, I feel like I've had my dream job in a lot of different ways. Right now, I do mostly executive coaching right now. And I just couldn't be happier right now. But, I needed to go through and make all of those mistakes to have, we're going to talk about hiring in a little bit. It's one of the biggest. I had this string at the school of phenomenal hiring years. We had several years of zero turnover with really good people. And, but ultimately making some real simple mistakes in the hiring kind of led to, were parts of the pieces of that chasm that started to come apart at the school. And I can look back at that now. It's kind of painful. I can look back at that and go, yep, I made these mistakes. And,
Let's jump into that, because there's a couple things. I think it's really important to note that sometimes you have to phase out of things that were really good at one time, right? Because you start to become the issue to the vibe of an organization, right? And that's really hard to come to terms with, because you're like, I've built this, I've sunk my teeth in, I've devoted everything to this, I've loved it for so long. And then you start to feel something and you're like, something's changed, something's off. Maybe it's not for me anymore. And I think it's mourning the loss of what you thought would be. And that's okay, because then you become a thorn into the vibe that you've sunk your teeth in to build. And you don't want to lose that, right? And I think that's probably what you're going to go into, is that if you start to look back, things started to shift and change. And it is with bringing in new talent, and it is with bringing in, people into the organization that ultimately change what it is. And sometimes that's for the better and sometimes it's not. So I think that's a really, it's like a very unique perspective that you have, and you didn't decide it, right? But it was decided for you, but it sounds like it was the best thing that could have happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's painful. I mean, it was incredibly painful. But looking back, you can always ask that question. Would you rather be back there? Well, of course not. I really wouldn't. So, and I've come to learn, and I think there's there's a higher understanding of this, whether it's spiritually or whatever. But the reality is, nothing ends well. It really doesn't. I mean, when you look at the small number of, whether it's founders or whether, whatever, things just don't end well. And I think when you go, that's okay, because that's not really what life's about. Life's not about everything ending well. I think it was the last movie, the Steve Jobs movie, and they had that board room. And when that happens, I mean, that was my situation. I mean, I saw that and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm like, I know exactly how he feels right now. But you look back and you go, things aren't supposed to last forever. They're just not. And when you can really detach from that, you're like, this is great as it is right now, and let's do great things. And then how this ends. And so just change the perspective on that. But
Yeah, and to have the humility to, like, look back and learn from it versus feel humiliated, right? Like, I think there's a difference between, like, humility and humiliation that, yeah, you can
oh,
really learn from.
100%. And people get bitter on things. Look, things happen. They just happen. And you go from there. But yeah, talking about people, we were, the first time we talked, Joe, like in HR in general, the issues are very rarely with the R. It's always with the H. It's always with the H, right? And so, and that's where the majority of issues come up in any organization, or with the people. And it probably should be that way. I mean, but that's how things are. And so, what I see, and I'll lead into this kind of the hiring mistakes and those things that I made, is like, in our culture training, a big part of it is, one of the principles is hire with rigorous discipline. And that's probably, and when we do it, whether it's our full day trainings or people gravitate towards, when we start talking about hiring, everybody sits up a little straighter in their chairs. They get their pens up, because it's just the common problem everybody has: finding great people, keeping great people, letting go of not great people. So the bottom line, just to get to where I was saying, is, so I had this great run of hiring people, and the vibe of the place helped because it attracted the right people. So I had a great run with that. And then I made the mistake of thinking I was good at hiring without a real great process, without without being really objective. And I think this happens where you start taking some chances that you shouldn't take, because you think the vibe, the culture is going to correct some of these issues. And, it does mold some of them, but it doesn't fix them. People add to your culture, or detract from your culture. There's no negative there. There's no neutral people coming in. And so towards the end, I made a couple hires that, looking back, had I had a really disciplined hiring process, I wouldn't have made. And it doesn't mean involved, or it doesn't mean elaborate. It just meant being very disciplined with it. There were things I didn't see, and that I think I chose not to see as I look back on that, because you wanted this to work so
And why did
well.
you make that choice? Oh, because you wanted it to work.
Well, I think so. And one of the things, you fall in love with people in the first 5-10 minutes of your interview, and you so want this to work out that you quit listening to what they're saying. And that came in. And so that ended up with some, we had some subpar folks, and it doesn't take much, to really wreck a culture, or start to, or create cracks, or have other
Gosh,
things
isn't
come
that the
up.
truth? I talk to people all day long, and I mean, not all day, every day, but in the work that I do, and it's like, they have this huge team and it's one person, and they're like, this person is ever so subtly just like bringing everybody down, or just creating cracks along the sidewalk. And it's one person. It's like, how does that happen?
It is amazing. And I learned this lesson in our house too. 'Cause so, like, we have a big family. We got 7 kids around here. It always amazed me how if one kid was, say, spending the night with somebody or was out, it changes the whole dynamic for the better, and they're all great. But when one's gone, things get better because there's just little things going on between this one and that. No, it could randomly just pick one. I mean, we always felt like let's just take 1 or 2 a week and send them somewhere. And those would be our good days. It's just, yeah, because there's these dynamics that are going on, whether it's personality or things that happen or whatever that is. And so, but that's what happens at teams. And that's why it's so important, the hiring. I mean, you know, some of the statistics where it's, a bad hire, it could cost 15 to 50 times the salary, and people sometimes ask about that. I'm like, well, there's the obvious ones of having to hire somebody and recruiting and all that things, but the stuff we don't measure, what's the effect on the vibe? What absolutely. And then, with our customers, with our first customers or the people that work for us, how do you put any kind of money on that? So, but that first part of being really disciplined in that hiring process. And so we know there's reasons people don't have a great hiring process. Most of them, you can summarize in saying we're lazy, and that sounds bad, but it's the truth. And we seek some convenience. So that's one. And then the other ones that we all know, hiring to fill a position. Okay. And I do a lot of work with schools. And so, I understand that, I'll talk to principals about hiring. I'll never forget. I went to speak at a school and I said, so you have some new beginning of the year, got some new people on staff. He said, yep, I have 7 new hires, and immediately said, I'm not really thrilled with any of them. Oh, geez.
Oh my word. Yeah, people get desperate.
But the reality is, and I know this, parents tend to, on the first day of school, they prefer to have a teacher in the room that their kids are in. So you do have to fill the spot. Now, we can talk in a minute about what do you do when you can't, so that's obviously a reason. Hiring for the wrong reasons, looking outside before looking in. I mean, these are all reasons that come into, and so, we just find ourselves, I hear it all the time. I got to fill this spot.
All the time. Or they don't perform. Like, also, there's like this other side of it. People don't performance manage or terminate somebody because they don't want an empty seat.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And because all that's going on, that's why one of the reasons we don't let people go is because, this is going to cost so much time, effort, and energy from there. But what I found, I was talking to a CEO about this the other day is, they're having trouble filling this position. I'm like, look, if you've got great people, they'll absorb that work for a period of time, and you compensate them in some little way. They won't ask for it. You compensate somebody, that's going to buy you a ton of time to find the right person. They will, so.
And I think people get so focused on, I need this person or this seat or this role or whatever, without thinking creatively of like, how do we split it up, or how do we make it happen in the interim? Or maybe let's just simply ask some people if they're willing to take on something on a temporary basis.
Yeah, because there's sometimes where you just don't fill it. You don't backfill the role. And you go, what did that person actually do? That took all that time, so that's one of, and, there's also the promotion kind of, mentality. So I remember sitting in at a executive team retreat, and they asked me, why don't you sit in first? We're going to go over the org charts so you can just see kind of the organization. They went through and they started talking about, the next year. And they said, well, and the first mistake they had is they had their org chart with everybody's pictures on it. I'm like, that's a problem. Okay. Because that now that's people. And is that really the best thing for the organization? And so, but they said, well, we want to move so-and-so up to whatever it's management level position or the next level up. She's done such great work. We'll move her up here. And that was immediately followed by, but she doesn't do this real well. So we'll need to fill that. And they went through like 2 or 3 things. And I remember talking to the CEO on the break. I'm like, why are you, moving that person to that position? And he's like, well, that's the next position on the org chart for her. And she's done great work, and we want to reward her, and we want to compensate her. I'm like, well, why don't you just pay her more? And he said, well, but because then she would make more than her manager. So, well, she's better at her job than her manager is. And that's okay. They have distinct,
We have to start to break some of these frameworks of like what we believe to be true. And again, go back to that, like, but why? But why? Why do we have to do that? Like, because somebody told us we have to do that? Like, but does it make sense? And is it creating the culture and the environment that we want?
yeah. It's, and sometimes it's as simple as asking a question like, and how's that working out for you? So, yeah. And they, yeah. And so the beginning of that, this hiring process, as we talk about it, being really disciplined, I won't go through the whole thing. There's a number of factors to that. One of those is having a really well-defined role description, which is different than a job description. I mean, people want to know their role in the mission, not what their job is. That's two different things in some ways. So what is my role in the mission? So very clearly, how does what this person does help fulfill the mission of the organization? There should be that direct link. And that's what you need to think about in role description. And then, so you get that role description, and then that's part of a scorecard that you create. And that scorecard is very specific about what the person in that role should accomplish, which again is different than what that person should do. And yeah, and I mean, there's simple examples of that. Like, so, a sales scorecard that says, this person, you'll make 90 outbound calls a month. It says nothing about sales. I can make those calls, and that's it. And the other one is really, you really see is like, so a receptionist, or, what did I hear called, director of first impressions. That was pretty good. I thought that one was, it really defined it. But, I can tell that person, your job is to answer the phone. Well, there's a lot of different ways that people can answer the phone. All right. But if the role description is, your job is to create the first impression of this company by interacting with inbound calls and directing them to the right person.
Like, if you had to tell the story of what the role is, like, it's storytelling, right? It's not like, let me give you a task list. It's like, let me tell you what I envision for this role, because this role is the first point of contact with the client.
Yep. And then, so when you've got that defined, and then you start talking about what that role should accomplish, okay, now you've got some set parameters. So if it is sales, okay, the person will have $1.2 million in sales per quarter. That's very clear. And when so you get the competencies. Okay, what are the competencies we're looking for? Put those down. And then this last one, which tends to be the toughest one for our clients, is, if you could magically infuse 3 qualities into every person at your company, what would those 3 be? And the challenge is not coming up with it. The challenge is coming up with 3. I was working with a group, and I, gave them that challenge, called the CEO back. I'm like, how's that going? He says, great. We got 8. I'm like, you don't get 8, you get 3. All right. Right along what Mark Twain, I would have written you a shorter letter, but I didn't have time. I mean, can you get down to say that everybody in this organization needs to possess these 3 qualities? What are they? And the simplest way to do it is go back and look at your A players. Where's the common thread? So like at our company, it's, awareness. Are you aware? Are you coachable? Those are the qualities. What are those? Are you aware? Are you coachable? And so when you get those nailed down, and you get your 3 nailed down, then those are the 3 qualities. So those kind of make up the 3 parts of the scorecard. Then, what I've kind of learned, and you're familiar, I mean, Jeff Smart does a great job of this, I think, just getting to the point of saying, his big thing is when you have that scorecard, then you just need to listen, which is like the second hardest thing in interviewing. All right. It's just shut up. All right. Okay?
Because we have a tendency to like listen to respond, not listen to understand.
We do that all the time. And that's death in interviews. And the other thing, particularly if you start liking the person, you start to, start rooting for the person to get a job. So you start feeding them the right questions. And it never amazed me. Like if I talk, at our company, we really value, we value cooperation. All right. So tell me a little bit about that. anyone but an idiot is going to say, well, I tend to be a very cooperative person. I'm a collaborative.
It's
So
like a leading question to like tell them the answer that you want to hear.
exactly. Right. So like what Jeff Smart says, it says, look, you go through their past few jobs and you ask them, so tell me at your prior job, what were you tasked to do? How did it go? And when we talk to your manager, how will they say how it goes? And be quiet and let somebody tell you that. And as you're listening and you got your scorecard, you're listening for where they demonstrated that they've done the things that they have a good chance of meeting that. People will tell you, the more comfortable you make people think, or more people make people feel, and you let them talk, they will tell you all kinds of things. A lot of things they shouldn't tell you. And even little things like attitudinally, well, this happened and I, didn't think the boss was right, but the boss is the boss. And wait a minute. Okay. I'm going to be next. I don't want that, coworkers. And that's not to say that people shouldn't. I mean, I've heard people very gracefully say, we really disagreed on this, but I understood the situation and this. So there's just different ways to do that. So, and then the same thing, with their competencies and then those qualities. So if we were hiring somebody, is committed, coachable, and aware in this conversation, what examples do we have that this person is committed, coachable, and aware? So there's a number of series of interviews that we recommend. One of them is a culture interview, and that usually involves somebody who's not in that department. And and that can be lunch. That can be a lot of different things. Yeah. So, right. There's a famous story. I forget. Maybe it was Zappos. I'm not sure, with the Uber driver. They hired the same Uber driver every time. And ask the Uber driver, how do he treat you?
Genius.
Yes.
By the way, genius.
Yep, absolutely. So what I found is, and I was actually involved in a project where I was helping kind of rebuild a team for this organization, kind of a pseudo fractional, whatever, lead team, had to do a lot of hiring, by having a number of people involved in the process, then you all come together and just getting those different viewpoints. And here I think is the key point, after you've gone through that interview, you're quiet during the interview. And the other thing is, you do not sell your company in the interview. Once you decide you're going to hire the person, now it's selling the time. Yeah. And so I was really, and I was involved in this. I was a little worried to start with because, first of all, when people they give their impression on the interview and then they get two choices. This person's a hell yes or a no. That's it. And so when you do that, and I was a little worried because, first time it was like 5-1, I was the no. And the second time it was like 6-2, and I was on the 2 of the yeses. Something.
And you almost have to like write it down and then flip it over, because people start to influence, like depending on their position within the organization, they start to influence how somebody else is going to respond, because they don't want to be the one to stick out.
Right. And there were a couple times where it was just a different context. Like, I didn't see that. That's interesting. Okay. And sometimes you can come to a conclusion of saying, okay, I think, but let's wait, let's get references, and let's ask those references. So that's really the power of that. People's objections come up. Let me ask the references about this, and it allows some people to get through, but so once you agree to that. And the neat thing about that decision metrics is, I've heard a couple of our CEOs say, that's really kind of permeated some other decisions we make. Like the other day we were talking about this, should we go with this supplier? He said, and one of my managers said, well, look, if we can't say hell yes on this guy, it's a no. And so, it's just, it forms a way of thinking.
Totally. Because suppliers and vendors, I mean, that's not something that we've talked about here, but suppliers and vendors can really affect your culture too, right? They can have a huge influence depending on how involved they are or what part of the business they're playing a role in. They can have a big impact. So it's almost like you need to apply a lot of those principles, like you were saying, to selecting the right suppliers and vendors too.
Absolutely. And so, you get to the reference part, and it's really interesting about references. I think most people are doing them now, but I'm still surprised when people don't really get to the references. And, those references are, look, I'm calling about so-and-so, can you tell me what they were supposed to do and how it went? And again, just listen. You're almost interviewing the reference. And I have my own thoughts about honesty on, references. I've had to have this conversation. Yep.
Yeah, because I get different clients saying different things. Like, why would anybody give me a bad reference? If I'm asking them for a reference, why would they give me a bad one? So is it really worth our time?
Well, I think my experience has been absolutely. First of all, the second part, the counter to that is, well, you don't just have to ask the people they give you. There's no law about that. Find out, if you don't find out one other person they've worked with that they didn't give you, then maybe you're not doing depending on the job, the research that they did. And the other thing though, is it gives you a chance, the concerns that come out of the interview of asking the person, did you ever see this? And sometimes people are like, I did see that, and so I had was talking to a group the other day, and I'm like, my thing is, you need to be honest on those references if you're a current employer, but people hide behind it. I don't want, I don't want to get sued, but I even said, like, in Ohio, there is a law protecting reference givers. So unless you have no legal exposure, I'm not a lawyer. So, but basically you don't have legal exposure if what you're saying is true. And the second part to that is you have to be asked. So it's not like, if I know you're interviewing, I can't call and say, oh, hey, listen, but those two things, you're protected. No one can, if what you're saying is true, then, so anyway, I think we owe it to people to say, well, say the good, but also in the bad. But you get the references, and then you start selling with the person you make the offer, et cetera. But that's a hiring process that's really disciplined, and you just avoid this, it's just like every coaching session I have. I know when it's a bad coaching session, I've talked too much. I know that's the number one. Looking back, I talked too much. And the same thing with interviews. If you can just be quiet. And so it's this organization I was working with has a really good hiring process. Very, very disciplined. And it was a great learning experience to be part of that, to say, okay, I'm actually doing it now. Because sometimes as coaches, consultants, et cetera, it's like, can you actually do this? Or I'm just telling you what to do. So that was really interesting. And you're going to miss on some. I mean, you're just going to absolutely miss on some, which kind of gets to the second part. One of the workshops we do is called Hire Right, Fire Fast. The ability to say, this isn't working, and to act on that quickly is also it's actually an important part of hiring, is to know when you need to separate from someone. So, and it's always sooner than you think it is.
Always. And it's like, trust your decision making. You went through this rigorous process to hire them. You're seeing something that's incongruent with what you believe to be true. Like, don't lose sight of that and just think, oh, they're new, or oh, they're still learning, or oh, this, or oh, that. Or maybe if you think that, just go have a conversation. Like, people are so hesitant, of what I've noticed, so hesitant to just go talk to the other person. They use that same excuse. I don't want to say something illegal. I don't want to get us in hot water. And I'm like, if you have good intentions, I trust that you will not.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Have good intentions, say what's true, say what and get on with it. And that kind of circling back to that, when I was talking about, schools, there's a defined period of time you have to find a teacher. You can't go past it. So my message to them was, okay, so if you're going through and maybe the person's not an A player yet, but what's holding them back is X, right? That's great. Now, put a coaching plan in place from day one, not when it becomes a problem, but from day one, and say, I'm setting you up with this teacher, and she's going to work with you on this, and get ahead of it. Cause where the hole in the swing is from the get-go. So if there is one of those things, just be real aware of it, and it allows you to put a coaching plan in place to allow that person to have some success. So, when I get it, there are things that are time bound, and you just have to hire somebody. If that's the case, it's not optimal, but
Yeah, but don't leave it
going
to
in,
chance.
right? Exactly.
Yeah,
right.
Because then you can look back and say, we actually have tried everything. Remember when we put this development plan together for you in the first place? And then, right? I mean, and then there's really no question. It's like, we put this together because we knew there was a gap. There's still a gap. It's really not working. And that's just honest. Like, majority of people respect that.
Yep. But, while we should optimize for A players, what gets optimized is completion. Like, sometimes with principals, they get to go home first, their school year's over when they've hired. Well, I don't want to be here in July. Right? Okay. So, not great gets me to the pool. And, so, but I think there's, moving fast on people. I think inside of that whole thing with folks is continually evaluating, the folks that you do have. And there's one, I think probably the best tool that we have proposed to people to do that is this grid that if you a 4-quarter grid and 4 quadrants. And if the horizontal is how they match up with you can call it your vibe, your culture, your values, the organization, positive is, to the right and negatives to the left. And then the vertical is how well they do their job. And so if you think about quadrant 1, which is that upper right-hand corner, those are folks, you got those people, you're great. Those are folks who are really get your vibe. They really get your culture and they're good at what they do. Boom. You do that. You got a great organization. Those are your A players. You're sitting well. The diagonal one from that's also not a problem because those are people who are not really good at what they do, but they make up for it by being a jerk. Okay. So those, if you don't fire them, somebody kills them. And so that takes care of itself. It's those other 2 quadrants where leaders really make their money. Quadrant 2 is tough. Those are folks who really match your values of your company, your culture, but they're not really good at what they do. That's really tough. And we tend to not move on those people because so good, such good people. It's such a good.
I feel bad. That's what I hear a lot. I feel so bad.
And I think the corollary to that is there's a couple of things. One is, are they in the right seat? I mean, can you move them around the organization to do something? Well, that makes sense, not just to put them somewhere.
Repurpose island.
Yes, exactly. That's a great one. Yes. Or can you actually help them? Maybe there's another place that they would be better at what they're doing. But because if they really do have those qualities, someone like that doesn't wake up in the morning and go, I'm going to go in and be mediocre and I'm okay with that. They really want to do well. And I saw this play out with a hire that, the person on paper looked like they had the qualities, talked to the references, looked like they had the qualities there. But when got into it, there was a gap in the ability to adjust to some technologies. And it became clear that we didn't think that was going to get, or the person I was coaching didn't think that was going to get better, but had the honest conversation, brought the person in and said, look, we're at 3 weeks. Normally, typically by 3 weeks, people are at this. You're not there. Now I've got this plan that we want to put in to try to accelerate this a little bit because we really need you to get up by this for this to continue. Well, what was interesting is they called back the next day and said, look, I'm going to step away from this job. And they said, look, every night when I got home, do you know how much stress I was under knowing that I wasn't keeping up with everybody else? And I love your organization so much. It was killing me. So I think we need to part ways. It was like the best ending possible for everybody. That person was fine. They felt like they were given a chance. The manager did exactly. And so, you can solve that problem. The other quadrant 3, that's the tough one. That's kind of the rainmaker. This man or woman, they're bringing in all kinds of sales, but they are toxic. They don't treat anybody with respect. I have a great story on this if I can. So one of our clients we work with is A1 Garage. Tommy Mello is, real star in the space. I mean, took a company $50,000 in debt to $200 million or more right now. I mean, it's got to go on. Yeah. And so, he tells this story early on. His vice president of operations came in and said, we got to let whoever go. He is just toxic. He comes late to meetings. He doesn't listen to meetings. And Tommy said, well, okay, but right now, his numbers are the sole reason we have these trucks on the road. He's paid for our trucks this year to be on the road. He said, so we'll do this, but you got to own it, to this vice president. Well, okay. So they make that move, said immediately people started showing up for meetings on time. They started participating in meetings. The people around them numbers shot up, and they did, I don't know, double that year than what they did with that person. And there's lots of reasons for that. One of them is became very clear that's not acceptable.
100%.
And
Yes.
so that's just amazing. And
yeah. It's like the fear of the unknown, right? Because they don't know, they think, okay, I know this. They bring in this revenue, right? And if I don't have them, the revenue goes away. But they don't think of all the collateral damage that has happened with them being there and how people will step up. They'll start understanding it's not acceptable. I know I've seen, story after story of clients I have when you start holding the line on something, it's actually a better outcome than you could have ever anticipated.
Yes, and it's that fear that prevents them from, because we create scenarios of what's going to happen if I let this person go. And very rarely does that come true. As I often tell clients, the people you fire never give you as much trouble as the people you don't. I mean, it just doesn't happen that way. And I remember we did some work with some churches and speaking to this young pastor, this priest. And he's like, I'm having trouble with this person. And he said, but I know I said, well, how much time are you spending on this? It's like taking 80% of my time with my staff and those things. And I said, well, what would happen if you let this person go? He said, oh gosh, he's so on the front side of things. People love him. And he said, I can't imagine the line of people would be coming in. I said, okay, well, how much of that time your day would it take? Like half my day would be on answering questions about this. Like, okay, well, you just gained 30% of your time back. Let the person go. None of the things came true. None of the, so it's just, and you never know. We have our, idea of where people are aligned. Well, if I fire this person's really going to be upset because they've been working together for. It's just amazing how people oftentimes like, it's about time.
100%. Yes.
But no one wants to raise
because people understand there's a human on the other side of that, right? So they're like, well, I don't want to talk out of turn, or I don't want to impact that person's life, because again, people have the best of intentions for other people also, and don't want to like hurt them unintentionally. But it's like, this is actually helping them because they need to go do something where they are aligned with the culture. They are aligned with the way things work. They are aligned with the values of the organization, because at some point their sales will run out, or their like the talent that they have will reach an end point, and it's just going to be all, again, that collateral damage along the way.
And Matthew Kelly makes this great point about that great salesperson. He says, look, sooner or later, your competitor is going to find somebody just as good as that person, but with good human qualities, and they are going to take every one of your people, and you're getting none of them back, no matter who you hire to replace this. So, but that fear, it's real. And that's why when this tends to always work, sit down with an executive and ask him 2 questions, because his coaching is not about telling what to do, asking questions. Say, look, if knowing what you know now about that person, would you hire them again? Number 1. And secondly, if the person walked in this afternoon and said, you know what, I had another offer. Unfortunately, I'm going to take it. I'm giving you my 2 weeks. How would you feel? And how many times I had an executive say, to that first question, no, I would not hire that person again, knowing what I do now. And if they came in and said that, it would make my week. So as a good coach, I usually say, let me just repeat that back to you. I'm not going to tell you what to do. And oftentimes they're like, don't even bother. I know what I got to do. And they do it. You talk to them the next month and you're expecting this big, debrief about what happens. Just, yeah, I let go of them and everybody was good with it. We're moving on. And even if someone leaves voluntarily, when you ask that question, so now what are the opportunities? That just changes the team right there. Well, yeah, we hate to lose this person, but they did fight the implementation of Salesforce and we want to do this. And now we have a chance to do that. And it's just,
it reframes the mindset.
It does. Yeah. So the fear is real. No one likes to hire people. Or fire people. No one likes to hire people, but if I mean, if you do enjoy it, now you're a psychopath. Okay, so that's not a good thing. Okay, but it should be painful because it's
Do it right.
inflicting. Yeah, but
Yeah.
you can do it with humanness, and that goes back to having the right expectations, and then kind of the last part of things, or do you let people know what to expect? That's where that scorecard, I think, comes in. Is if you make the scorecard, it's not double work. If you make the scorecard, guess what? On the quarterly review, let's talk about your progress on these 4 things, these
Yeah, it's
4
no
outcomes.
longer a feeling, it's a
Yep.
fact.
But that doesn't happen all the time, because sometimes what happens is a scorecard gets created either by the manager or by HR, or then when it comes to evaluations, one of them's creating a different tool. So you have 2 different tools. We hired you under this tool. We evaluate you under that tool. There's some disconnect in there. Those 2 should be exactly the same. You should be able to sit down and have a 25-minute conversation once a quarter saying, well, let's just check. How's this going? Okay. Tell me where you've exhibited the 3 qualities of being committed, coachable, and aware. Great. Here's your numbers. That's straight. I've kind of worked with some of our clients of creating that system, just taking it, and some of them taking it, they take their scorecard, they make it an evaluation tool. And then we have the whole, which I don't want to get into about rankings, 1 to 10. I sat in, an hour and a half of my life I'm never getting back in a meeting about what an 8 is. Okay. So,
oh my gosh.
And the whole thing, like even on a 5, if you have a graphical person, an imagery minded person, and you give them a 4, they're thinking, okay, I'm over by 5. That's in the good neighborhood to be in. You give an analytical person, they're like 4 out of 5. That's 80%. That's a C. I'm not a C player. Same. And so people ask me, what should your scale be? I say 272. It doesn't matter. Okay. So actually a lot of our clients are going to red, yellow, green. And because it's so, look, if it's green, keep going. You're doing great. If it's yellow, little inconsistent, you need to pay attention to this. And if it's red, if you don't fix it, you're going to stop receiving a paycheck. So it just so simplify it. Let people know what to expect. You hired them for this, evaluate them on that. And then if it's not working out, then it's clear to everybody. Now, I don't believe, I've heard it said, if when you go to hire somebody, it should not be a surprise to them because you've done all your steps.
It's still a surprise.
You can think about your relationships, right? Pre-marriage relationships, right? When the person says it's over, you don't go, I can see that because a few months ago you told me I was selfish. I've been late to 3 things. This is no surprise. I saw this coming. No, it is emotional because you're saying you're not good enough. And that's hard for everybody. I've been there, and it's not rational, but you can, if people are honest, they have an idea and it can take this thing away and you can do it being a human. But so much of this is just taking the time to do it up front. Don't put yes, so that you can do it, so that you can repeat it over and over again. Don't put up with nonsense, and then, and hire A players, and, I've kind of, and this will be the last thing that, like it feels, well, how do you know an A player? What's the definition? Well, going back to Jeff Smart, he's kind of a technical one of the person should have a 90% chance of being in the top 10% of all the people that do that work. That's their definition, which I think is interesting. I've come up with a couple other ones that I think are like, A players need to work autonomously, right? They don't need to be micromanaged. A players need either goals or guardrails. Fine. What are the rules? Get out of my way. Those are 2. The other one is, A players don't need you to bend reality for them. So I can do this work, but Tuesdays are really bad. And every once in a while I need to be, that just doesn't, they can do the work in the reality of the situation. A players, don't pine for the trough. What I mean by that is like, waves, and back to physics, has a crest and a trough. How often, a lot of people can, when things are chaotic and it's all just going, they can ride that wave for a while and they can operate in that. But what I found is like A players can always operate on that. B players and C players say, when things settle down, That's how they want the trough. They pine for the trough to be there. That's how you kind of know that. And then the last thing I'll tell executives hiring is don't forget that those people they have to be an A player, but they also have to work for you. Because I see that sometimes. This person's great, they got all the things, but they don't work well with, that person works for you. And if they can't work for you, that goes back to bending that reality. That's a problem. So anyway, you get those things in mind. You go, okay, now I kind of get what an A player is, and that's what you're looking for. And don't settle for anything less than that, even if it takes a little bit longer. It just saves you time on the end, because all the stuff we're talking about.
It's like they're gonna do 100, not 100 times, but they're gonna do 120% more than any B or C player. They every time, and they'll step in the gap every time.
And circling back, those if you do your job on hiring, you're doing the best you can on preventing energy leaks, and you do that, and now all of a sudden, all of your energy, doesn't go to friction. Get back to physics. You push on something, you lose part of the force to friction going. It eliminates some of that friction. And so you're just not working against yourself.
And you're pouring into the reason that you started the business or you joined that organization or whatever, right? Like instead of spending your days pouring into the friction, you're like, wait, I joined this rad tech company in order to do X, Y, and Z. And all I'm doing is pouring my energy into trying to like get these people to like just do their job. You're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my mind.
And there is a point of like, it's not working. You're not
for sure.
It's just not working. And I've done the best I can to do this, but I need to know this quickly. This isn't working. I think that also sends a message too. Like, wow, you got to be on top of your game to work here. Which A players want. A players will not stick around long with C players. And I just saw a study the other day. What was it that if you put someone next to a high achiever, their work, my numbers are going to be wrong here, but I think I got the ratio right. Their work increases by 15%. If you put somebody next to an underperformer, their work decreases by 30%.
That right there is enough of a statistic to just pour your time and energy into hiring the right people. All right. So on that note, if you had to give one piece of advice to leaders, listeners of like what to go do next, like we covered so much here, right? Hiring and firing and all the things and like culture detractors but like, what's the one thing they can just go do now after they listen to this that would get them headed in the right direction?
Right. I think this is a good exercise. I don't know if it's called top grading or something in effect, but like look at your current team and do two things. One, make a list, 1 to whatever. Put your best person down and rank them. No matter, just rank the people in numerical order. Number 1. Number 2 is that grid I talked about. Put names in one of those 4 quadrants. That will give you the picture of, am I hiring right? Do I have the right team? Why? And I think it solidifies that idea of who our A player avatar is. If I could hire 6 more Kristis, we would crush this. What does she do? Why? Why do you say that? Well, she's this. Great. Hire a bunch of people like her. What are the qualities? More importantly, what are the common qualities? Because you can have 2 totally different personalities, but those people, they do this right. And when you come up with those, so that's what I'm saying. That leads to those 3 qualities, and then just get committed to the hiring process. But take a look at your team right now and do that. And then you got a real clear vision of what, going forward, I think. So
awesome. Well, thank you, Tony, for all the wisdom and insights. And I know we could talk for hours and hours and hours, and we will probably do a round 2. So I look forward to that because you have a lot to share and a lot of wisdom to give other people. So thank you for today. I appreciate you. And yeah, look forward to impacting people who are listening in and doing the right thing in terms of upgrading their organization.
Yeah, it was an honor to be here. I really appreciate the time and somebody to listen to me. So.
Before we wrap up, I want to pause on something that really stayed with me from this conversation with Tony. This wasn't just a talk about hiring or performance or even leadership tactics. It was a real reminder that building strong teams takes courage. The courage to slow down when hiring, to ask better questions instead of rushing to answers, and to be honest, sometimes painfully honest, about who is truly thriving on your team and who isn't. Tony shared so openly about learning through mistakes and simplifying when things feel heavy. Whether we're talking about defining A players, navigating hard exits, or rebuilding after change, the through line is this: people matter, energy matters, and ignoring either always costs more in the long run. If you're leading a team right now, I hope this episode gave you permission to get a little more disciplined and a lot more intentional about who you bring into the organization and how you support them once they're there. Because the strongest organizations aren't built by avoiding hard decisions. They're built by making them well. Thanks for spending your time with us. Stay curious, stay courageous, and keep vibing, my friends. If this episode inspired you and you want to see how you can take the next step to creating a better vibe within your organization, I'd love for you to download our complimentary 75 Vibes worksheet. This is a simple tool to create a habit and mindset around creating great vibes in work and life. The best part, it's simple and it works.